Hey everybody, Matt Barton here with this week's Broker Minute or Two. Had some recent conversations with agents about this issue, and apparently there's even some discussion in some online forums about this, and so thought I would just quickly get this out there to hopefully add some clarity for our organization. Has to do with earnest money and cancellations based on Section 8 of the REPC. So let's pull that up on the screen. I'm really not going to spend time here on 8.1. It really kind of stands on its own due diligence, and the words in there, right, at the buyer's sole discretion, pretty powerful language. Not too many questions about how that works. But we get down into section 8.2 and 8.3, right? So one of the things I do not like about our current purchase contract is the fact that even though we have two separate conditions, we use one common date known as the F&A or the financing and appraisal deadline to cover two conditions. And I think that's a precursor or part of the reason why there's some confusion with these two sections and what constitutes cancellation, which one trumps the other, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm actually going to start with 8.3b, right? So years ago, this section, section I, was added to allow our buyers and buyers agents to sweeten their offer by saying, hey, if you accept our offer, and I'm painting with a very broad brush, but if you accept our offer within a certain time frame, a certain portion of our, say, $10,000 earnest money will become non-refundable if we cancel after due diligence and before financing. That was the main driver. It's not the only driver, but it was the main driver for this section. How do we sweeten the offer, right? And so, of course, it has some particular requirements. You can only cancel on this section, 8.3b, and affect what's in earnest money by the terms that are specified here. So the first one is it must be after the due diligence deadline. So that's an important thing. I've had some people cancel before based on this, but they're doing it before the due diligence deadline. I'm like, you're contradicting the contract. But if you were to cancel after the due diligence and before the financing and appraisal deadline, then whatever dollar amount is in this area would then be released to the seller, right? It does have a second category, which is, okay, what happens if you cancel after the financing and appraisal deadline? And in that case, all of the earnest money, including what is in this section, would be released to the buyer and, to the seller. And it further goes on to explain in section 3 that if that's the case, earnest money deposit is going to be the seller's exclusive remedy, right? Kind of hard to sue for performance when you can't qualify for a loan to actually perform on the loan. So that's kind of the rationale there. All right, so where the confusion apparently is coming in is like, well, what happens if somebody has, out of $10,000 earnest money, they have $5,000 here. And after the due diligence deadline, right, which is a requirement in this section, they choose to cancel based on appraisal. What I want to show you here is you have the main section in the dark green, which is, here's all of the conditions. Then the three that are in light green, due diligence, appraisal, and financing condition, are their own individual conditions of purchase. Think of them as they kind of stand on their own on an island unless there is specific language that allows them to bridge the gap between the two islands. So everything we just covered in the financing condition is very explicit, right? But it doesn't preclude you, it does not stop you or your client from canceling based on the appraisal condition. It's its own island with its own specific instructions in regards to what happens to earnest money. So let me go through that really quickly. If this is checked in the affirmative, then the buyer has the right to cancel. And then here's the big condition, if. So if after an appraisal is done, we receive a valuation that says it doesn't appraise for the amount of the purchase price, then what can happen? Buyer can cancel the REPC, right? And they do that by providing written notice, right? Think of section 18 and what's required under the notices section, and also providing a copy of the appraised value no later than the financing and appraisal deadline. And then what happens if you do those things? Very clear. Whereupon the earnest money deposit, regardless of what's down in 8.3, it's on its own island, whereupon the earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer without the requirement of further written authorization from the seller. So coming full circle, I think part of the reason agents and even some brokers get confused on this is because we have one deadline that covers two conditions. The financing and appraisal deadline covers two independent conditions in the contract. So the fact that there's a common date, do not let that confuse your mind as to what remedies are available, or I should say what exits are available to a buyer. And our job as sellers agents is to understand that and explain to our clients what potentially could happen until those dates are passed. I hope that adds some clarity. As I always tell people, a lot of clarity comes when you actually read through the entire contract in totality and see the interlinking between the various components. But I hope this little explanation on Section 8 makes things clearer for you that there are three independent, separate conditions for exiting the contract. As usual, have a great week, and let me know if you have any questions that I can help you with.